Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us today for Fractal's webinar, The Future is Rethinking Personalization from Consumer to Context. I'm your host, Garima Benewal. Before we start, just wanted to mention that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand on the Fractal website at fractal.ai. Attendees are currently in a listen-only mode. If you have any questions during the webinar, please send us a message via the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll address them during the Q&A session. It is my pleasure to now introduce our speakers. Kevin McCurdy, he is the Global CPG Segment Lead, APN, for AWS, responsible for identifying and engaging relationships with strategic ISV and SI partners for the AWS Global CPG vertical. Kevin brings in 25 plus years of experience in supply chain management, category management, and demand signal management, working with leading global CPG companies and retailers. Prior to AWS, he's worked with E2 Open and JDA and have co-founded Orchestro Inc. and Mercury Technologies Inc. Welcome, Kevin. Anurag Wesh. Anurag is the Chief Practice Officer, Behavioral Sciences and Design at Fractal. Anurag co-founded Final Mile in 2007, the first behavioral sciences-based strategy and design firm in the world. In his current role, he is mandated to institutionalize a problem-solving method that integrates AI, engineering, and design. Welcome, Anurag.
Okay.
Rahul Desai. Rahul is a client partner at Fractal and leads the algorithmic decision-making team. He brings in 16 years of experience in analytics, including algorithmic decision-making, customer loyalty and analytics at Fractal, structured derivatives, FX, interest trading, market and credit risk at HDFC Bank and Barclays India, and revenue management and analytics for Wyndham Europe and US. Welcome, Rahul. Anurag, I'll hand it over to you now to please get started.
Thanks, Garima. Guys, I hope you can hear me. So thanks for joining this conversation. I mean, personalization is something that we live and breathe every moment nowadays, right? And when I was kind of preparing for this conversation, right, I said let's go to the web and look for some content, right? And there's so much content, right? There's just so much reporting and so many experiments and so many case studies, and then you have a company which is filled with engineers and data scientists, right? And you talk to them. It feels like personalization has been done to death, right? There's so much personalization, everything is brilliant and glorious, right? But when you start kind of internalizing it a little bit and start thinking of your own experiences, right? You do see a lot of headroom where personalization can get much better, right? I mean, a very simple case like you kind of are standing outside the a bank branch, kind of trying to draw some money from an ATM. And there's no money in the ATM, right? And then you walk into the branch and you give your customer number or whatever identification they need. It's unlikely that they would know that you actually just had a false positive with the ATM, right? And that you're looking for money, right? So those things are missing. At the same time, I think in digital environments, we are seeing a lot of choices being customized, being personalized for us. Different experiences being kind of provided to us. So one is not suggesting that there is no personalization, and why should it not be, right? There's so much data that we are leaving behind. There's so much data signals that's available to a data scientist, right? There is a lot, but I think there is a lot more to do, right? But I wanted to kind of limit my conversation here to a few provocations that I wanted to make from a decision-making point of view, right? So if I may take a second to explain, right? Saying, so there's an engine, right? There's data science, there's algorithms, there's engineering that kind of pulls up what is best for you, right? And then there is an environment in which we are supposed to make those decisions, right? So personalization is not about automating decisions for you. It's more about creating an environment where you feel very empowered to make those decisions, right? So in the context of those decision making, right, I wanted to throw out a few provocations and then kind of get into a discussion around how we can all work together to make use cases out of it, and how technology is enabling it, right? So one of the first provocations I wanted to kind of speak about was the fact that, that the current, right, our current behaviors, our current dispositions are far more influencing our decisions, right, than what we have done in the past, right? And all the long, thick, big data that we have, right, provides a very stable view of our personas, of our preferences. And not to say that the scientists are not picking up, clickstream data, which kind of suggests what you're doing right now, what behaviors are you displaying, right? But my view is that, some of these behaviors, right, need to be interpreted from a emotion and a motivational lens also, right? Because ultimately, right, when we are making decisions, we cannot make a decision without emotions, right? No emotions, no decisions, right? So if you're able to kind of interpret some of these behavioral data to feel and understand what emotions or what motivations are driving people in that moment, I think what we'll do is we'll create better recommendations, right? A better recommendation in that moment, right? So for instance, right, if we can pick up fatigue signals, right? If we can pick up tiredness signals, right? Somebody just kind of, scrolling through web pages mindlessly, right? Is a signal for tiredness, right? If you pick up those signals and kind of promote indulgence categories, right? Or categories that create new fuel, new energy for you, right? That's one way of kind of picking emotional, motivational signals and personalizing your experience, right? In a less frivolous context, right? I mean, you could look at connected cars and see how you could pick up fatigue data, right? And kind of over-index safety measures in a car, right? So many of these behavioral triggers can be repurposed to understand the emotional and the motivational content and create better personalized recommendations in that situation, right? But the second point that I wanted to make is that recommendation is one piece, right? The other piece is how do we get people to respond to our recommendation, right? So even if a data scientist picks up fatigue and knows that a driver is fatigued, and I need him to respond to additional safety measures, right? You need to design that decision environment so that you get a positive approach, you get a positive response out of the person, right? And that, to my mind, is where a lot of behavioral science, a lot of design comes together to create a sense of a choice, create a justifying narrative, create a nudge, right? That promotes that favorable decision that you want people to make, right? So on the right hand side, there's a quick example of the same recommendation. The recommendation engine is throwing up a recommendation saying you need this guy to buy, say, economy plus ticket because he's either traveling early in the morning or he's traveling with a family, right? But with all the data, right, you need to embed that recommendation in an environment where it becomes easier for people to make that decision, easier and less dissonating, right? It cannot be that these decisions are being made in an environment where people are suffering from dissonance, right? So that, to my mind, is the second piece, right, where we can significantly up the play on how personalization work for us when we are making our decisions. Right? The final point I wanted to make was a point that we are all familiar with, right? That our preferences are highly dynamic. They are open to distortion. With the amount of information we leave behind, it's possible, right, for brands and services to promote or to get us to make decisions that may not necessarily be the best value for us, right? So I think with big data comes big power, and then the responsibility to empower people to make decisions rather than automating decisions for themselves. Right? So that's where we kind of talk about how personalization is about building trust, is about giving people experience and not necessarily always driving transactions, right? So those are the three provocations I wanted to begin with, right? And hand it over to Rahul, who will use potentially a connected car case study to show how some of these provocations can be built into how we engineer and how we kind of build recommendation engines for consumers. Rahul, over to you.
Well, thank you, Anurag, for those wonderful provocations, as always. And um, no, and I think what I'll try and do is try and create a high level solution, a very high level solution, which I believe should address some of the concerns, and we'll try and build this out together, right? Because I want to keep this interactive, and we'll feel free to kind of put in your questions on the chat so that you get a sense of how you're thinking about it. Um, the framework I'm going to kind of talk about is something which people have seen before in many multiple forms. So let's look at it and let's play it out and see if this kind of sounds familiar. Um, Anurag spoke about the fact that context is important, the present is important. You have to understand decisions not just necessarily in the world of looking at historical data, but trying to bring in context, right? And that's precisely step number one, right? Bring in as much information as you potentially can. A connected in car is a great example of extremely complex, very high velocity data flowing through lots of sensors, churning out lots of information very quickly. There is a lot of external data that can be fused in to bring in context. If I want to understand, let's play out that example of tiredness and picking up a tiredness signal in a connected car, right? And so to understand tiredness, obviously there is no algorithm that's going to be able to quantify for you what the level of tiredness is, but a tired person or a tired driver will exhibit certain behaviors. And the point about sensorizing is that you're able to capture all of those behaviors because you're able to recreate them. So external data has been extremely useful. In our experience, even adding when we've been building forecasting models for our clients in the world of COVID, just bringing in things like mobility and unemployment at a local level has been able to tremendously improve our forecasts, right? So external data under uncertain times can bring in a lot of context. And the reason I'm saying sensorize everything is because typically modeling works when you're trying to encode the entity, right? It's all about personalization today is getting closer and closer towards the end consumer, towards understanding end consumers. There's now technology out there where you can, try and understand consumer behaviors at a very micro level, right? However, still, context, which is what Anurag keeps talking about, is missing. How do you really encode not just the entity, but how do you encode the environment, right, and the context? And I'll give you an example, right? Now, I'm trying to understand tiredness. So I'm trying to understand whether, one of the hypotheses I could bring in is, for example, behavior under tiredness means you drive inconsistently, right? Or you may have a certain posture if you're getting picked up from a dash cam, or you may have a certain tone in your voice which could indicate, tiredness. So there are three signals which I just hypothesized, right? And if I can craft out these signals, and to craft out the first one, I got to understand GPS data along with velocity data, along with traffic data to understand how you're kind of behaving under different conditions, right? So that's when I talk about encoding the entity in context of the environment. It could be an investor making rash decisions in the market. Unless I bring in external data about how the market's moving and several other dimensions of the market, and unless I triangulate that investor information with the market, I'm never going to be able to bring in that context, right? So that's number one. This is also where you not only understand the state of the entity, the environment, how they interact, but you're also making predictions. You're also saying, look, there is a chance that the volatility in this journey might increase, which essentially means you're getting more and more confidence in that tiredness signal. And I want to now create an alert, which I need to now orchestrate out, right? So that's a prediction that I'm trying to make. Or I'm saying, here is my set of consumers who's likely to buy these set of products, or here's my set of consumers who are likely to try it. So I'm really predicting at an individual customer, what they're likely to do, and in an explainable manner, because tomorrow, we're talking about, and everybody is talking about ethical AI, transparent AI, making sure you're able to understand and explain every single action and every single decision, making sure you have the right governance to ensure the wrong kind of data does not feed the system. And so you have to be completely transparent. There's now technology to do that, right? Another part of this is about predictions is you're always optimizing against a certain goal, right? When you're taking a decision, you are taking a decision amongst many other decisions, and you're really trying to take a decision which is optimizing a particular goal. Here is another consideration for, the ethical way of personalization, right? Here is where you would decide whether it is profitability versus financial well-being. This is where you would decide if I want to optimize for consumption versus health. This is where I optimize driver experience versus safety in a car. So I need to make sure I'm optimizing for the right goal, right? Now, once I have an action recommendation, this is where orchestration comes in. This is where, Anurag extremely valid point around creating the right environment comes in, right? Because I'm creating the nudge for you to act in a particular manner, right? Which is again going to eventually go and optimize that goal for you, right? I'm going to make sure you don't invest in a rash manner because I want to make sure your portfolio is secure, or I want to make sure that you get the right alert on your tiredness at the right time, so you make a corrective decision, right? But think about it. I could execute that decision in many different ways. I could have a smooth music transition. I could have a ping. I could have a loud alert. So there's many ways in which I can ping you. I need to know what worked and what didn't, right? So for me, I need to create that feedback mechanism back into the system. If I create, for example, a nudge, to alert you against the fact that you're tired by setting off an alarm, and that further causes more volatility in the way you react. You could potentially, have a jerk as a reaction to that, which causes more volatility in the way you're traveling. Or if I don't architect a particular message for my investor correctly, they may actually go and make multiple such decisions because they'll keep reinforcing their bias and their emotions, right? So the nudge is as important, the environment is as important as the actual action and the nudge, if not more, right? And then it's about understanding the feedback, really crafting out the feedback, understanding whether you're really progressing towards the goal. Are you correcting your actions, or are you actually having more volatility in your travel, or are you consistently, in spite of the nudge, every 10 minutes you are kind of reverting back to the same behavior, then I might have to intervene and change, or create another signal. So the idea is, do I learn with every interaction, right? And the loop goes on, right? Now, when I learn, I want to update my understanding of the entity. I want to update my understanding of the environment, right? Looks great from 50,000 feet. We keep saying this, but lots of frameworks work in this manner. John Boyd's famous OODA loop is almost a very, very similar and adjacent to this kind of, right? It's about, observe, orient, and act, and, learn again. So, it's about, you've seen it multiple times, but I still have to, it's almost, but look, I mean, in an ideal situation, if you have a continuously learning system like this, my suspicion is Facebook and Google have great learning systems built at scale, trying to figure out every single action, and every single action actually goes and propagates new information about us, right? And this is proven. I mean, we've seen this, there have been multiple kind of talks on technology which allow us to do this. But enterprises somehow, I have seen in my experience, have not taken this leap. They've created components of this, and they're almost ready to take this kind of a leap of an ecosystem which kind of learns about consumers, or in the world of CPG, for example, similar situations can learn about, things like strategic revenue management could fit very nicely in such an ecosystem, right? So these are systems which we are close to building, but, I've seen, various reasons, from organizational silos or just the willingness to take the leap, which kind of have not really taken enterprises to the level of the Facebook level of understanding of their consumers. And things like this can be built because the technology is there. So Anurag, if you just playing out the last piece of this slide, I mean, I want to reiterate the fact that the AI is there, right? We've done some brilliant work. Think about GPT-3 and the implications of that, right? GPT-3 is the greatest language model that you've seen, and you've seen remarkable things that GPT-3 can do. Now think about creating not a GPT-3, but at least a microcosm of that, just to understand consumer behaviors continuously, right? So my point is the AI is there, the encoding and the learning part of it is there, or we'll get there soon when it comes to customer behavior. I think that's not going to solve the problem, right? You got to understand customers emotionally. You got to understand how they behave under certain contexts and the conditions, because these are unobservables, right? These are things you're never going to be able to quantify. You're only going to be able to quantify behaviors which emanate because of these emotions and biases. So it's extremely important to understand consumer behavior, which is where design comes in. And none of this is going to work unless you sensorizing, and every single part of this has to be engineered to perfection, right? I mean, has to be engineered with a level of how Google Maps does it or how Facebook does it, right? And I think I see lots of enterprises going down this route, or at least having the AI and the engineering chops to do it. But I think true magic will come when all three of these fuse together. So I think that's a response from from a solutioning perspective. And Anurag, hopefully I've been able to address some of your provocations. I know they are very hard. You pose very, very tough questions to us all the time. But Kevin, with that, want to bring you in, and we're really excited to have you. We want to talk a lot about this. So you've seen what we've spoken about. You've seen some of the provocations Anurag raised, and I tried to create some sort of a solutioning around that. But in reality, right? Where do you see the state of the nation? How do you see cloud technology or the technology landscape in general for personalization? How's that evolving, Kevin?
Yeah, very, very good. And one of the things that you tied in there was the understanding the environment and the context of where decisions are being made. So the interesting thing is how far we've come. The world has moved from this, if you will, and especially in consumer products, from this customer focus. So the crafts, the P&Gs often tried to segment all of us into key demographic groups or how much we spend, and then tried to align those, and how are they going to then market a product to us, to where we're moving more to a consumer centric, so us as an individual. So we want to be treated as individuals, not just getting this blast email or getting this blast offer that's going to everyone, but why is it tailored to me? So we're seeing, with a lot of folks, how do I leverage all of that context, the environment, the environmental data, weather information, clickstream, social media type information, situational data, to shape as I'm making my purchase decision at that point. How do I tailor it and or then potentially serve up future recommendations to that customer, but really tailoring to their individual situation at that time.
And I think the key again is about I think as Anurag very rightly brought it up, right? It's not about transactions. It's about the experiences, right? So how does technology ensure that a personalization is not just about the transactional moment, right, but it's about the overall experience, about the overall customer experience.
Yeah, and I think that I love the example Anurag used around the upgrading of the seat, because understanding more and tailoring to me as the purchaser, not just that it's $75 to get this seat to get extra leg room, but why is it important to me if I have a child or if I have some other situation that I need for that extra room? it becomes, I think, less about that $75, but really they care about me, my personal situation. They know more, almost like that seat is for me. But that's where we see the personalization comes in. And so as I can leverage as much of the context, the data that may exist, not just did I buy one unit of that the last time I made that purchase, or I bought two that time, but more to that context, whether it be weather, as you talk about COVID, what's the situation in the location and the area that I'm in, and what might trigger my purchase decisions to buy more or go to shop at this given versus buy online. So each of those is very key, not just do I add one more, two more, et cetera, to the purchase.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Sorry,
Anurag.
Can I make a quick point, right? Kevin, totally agree with you, right? And I think a lot of behavioral data that we pick on a consumer, right, at any point in time, it's open to interpretation, right? I mean, we can interpret it the way we want to, right? We could interpret it as saying that he's looking for something, right? But I think the leap of faith happens when we try to read the motivation or the goal behind it, right? Saying, why is he looking, right?
Yeah.
And not just get absorbed by the correlation of it. And I know, at times it's not easy, like Rahul said, right? That so much of data is not observable, right?
Yeah.
But can AI learn to take that leap of faith and say, you know what, I read this emotion or this goal or this motivation or this relevance in this situation, right? Which maybe leads to the same recommendation, but kind of puts that recommendation in an environment which is personalized to me, right? And therefore the child and the mother traveling together comes in, right? Or the early morning, red eye flights, right, come together, right? So
yeah,
sorry,
and I think that where I think that is where it's leading to the future is that understanding, not just about what did I buy before, and I take some of this, a lot of times folks have used weather as an example, but how do you use that AI and ML to learn over time, and that tapping into the emotion? I think that tapping into the emotion is probably one of the most personal ways to pull in that customer. And in that, and this is where I go back to millennials these days. In the past, you had different brands that customers associated with. Millennials are less concerned with brands. They want it to be about themselves. So that is the most personal thing, I think, for individuals, where you tap into their emotions. The customers immediately gravitate in, and they think about those as they go forward in making their purchasing decisions. So it's one of the biggest things, I think. Tapping into that emotion of an individual personalizes it for them. So
Kevin, I will come back to you with another question. I have something interesting from the audience that's actually come up, and this is a question, Anurag, I'm sure you would love to take up. So the question says, neuro-marketing is about how our emotions and intuition shape our decisions. How good marketing kicks our neurons to the brain and unconsciously molds our decisions. It's been observed that 80% of marketing fails because they don't capture the sweet spot of mind. How can organization handle this situation? And is it necessary to implement a behavioral sciences department in the organization?
I hope it's important, and I keep my job, right? So I think it's becoming vitally important. I used to tell my clients some years back that you have a choice today to kind of delve into behavioral science, to delve into consumer emotions in making your decisions. Tomorrow you won't have that choice, right? So it will become a necessary part of how we kind of understand our customers and kind of enrich their decision making and their experiences, right? So the second part was an easier question, obviously, right? The first part is the difficult bit, right? I mean, at a POC level, at a very captive, small environment level, it's easy to demonstrate how, when you take into account emotions and all of that, it kind of leads to much better understanding and much better ways of, helping your customers, right? But when you start scaling it up, right, and that's where I think the point that Rahul was making some time back comes into play. How do you read this data, right? I mean, I can sit in front of you and read your emotions, right? But how do you kind of, use clickstream data or how people are behaving, what they're doing to read that data, right? And I think that set of algorithm is waiting to be discovered, right? I mean, there are some examples of it from the work that's been happening, right? To say, like we discussed, right? Saying mindless browsing can kind of signal depleted energy, right? But can we write an algorithm for every emotion known in every context, right? And say, here I picked it up, right? But I think that's the scaling bit that needs to be figured out, right? And I think there's some way to go on that because we are still reading behavioral data as behavioral data and not taking the leap of it and saying there's the embedded emotion in that behavior, there's the embedded goal relevance in that behavior, right? So I don't know, Kevin, Rahul, please add or disagree. That's where I think we are with that data.
Yeah, no, I would
Yeah.
agree. I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and Kevin, that kind of leads us to that question around, can you think we have the technology to not just look at historical transactions, right? Do we understand motivations, goals, of customers or consumers, for example,
Yeah.
in the CPG world?
Yeah. So, and I go back again. I think tapping into that emotion. So there may be things around clickstream data. There may be the way they're interacting on social media. You may pick up as a consumer product where a consumer is potentially environmentally concerned via social media interactions that you want to tap into their caring for sustainability and how their packaging is much more sustainable in the way they go about they go about manufacturing. So how do I tap into that? Even from the social media piece within. So that's an example. We see a lot of that care within the sustainability side. But then the other examples I like in terms of the fatigue or how do I motivate them to make the click or the purchase or to dive deeper into not just the headline banner, but how do I drive deeper in to search for other pieces, but again, tailoring it to them.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Kevin. I think we're getting a few questions from the audience. So I think I'm going to take, we're getting some questions on the ethical aspect. So, we'll kind of address them together. The first one says, too much personalization with respect to providing the right content based on current behavior of the user might lead to having control over the user's behavior at large. So what can be the threshold to the extent of making such applications as far as ethics are concerned? There was another question here which says, where should enterprises draw a line in tapping the emotional side of the customer? When we talk about tapping into the emotional side, how do we define responsible AI or ethical AI? Is there a boundary? Anurag or Kevin, anyone wants to go first? I mean, I can, and I can come in later.
Go ahead, Kevin, if you want to go first.
Well, I think there are some parameters where you may respect where the users have set up either privacy controls or certain elements there to respect those, respecting also laws that may be, country specific laws around how use of data is accessed, but tailoring to the way the customers have set up some of their privacy rules is always key.
Yeah, I mean, if you take all boundary conditions out and say, okay, there is no law, there is no regulation, right, that prevents us from reading emotional data and kind of managing customer experiences, right? I think the most important part is to be able to showcase your intent, right? I mean, what is the intent of this guy who is trying to personalize, right? And I think we as humans are very good at reading that intent, right? I mean, it takes nothing, right, for us to quickly understand what is this agent trying to do, right? And that's where the point of trust and experience comes in, right? If we personalize in a responsible manner, right, no matter how much data we use, right, consumers will get it, right, and they'll respond favorably. They might reject you sometimes, but that's the choice, that's the control that you hand to the customer, right? And so my point is, right, it's more than transparency of the algorithm and more than transparency of your recommendation engines, right? You need to be transparent about your intent, right? Why is Netflix trying to, curate all this content for me? Why is Amazon creating recommendation lists, right? Why are these people doing that? If they're doing that to make my decision making easier, simpler, better, less disorienting, I'm fine with it, right? If it's just about getting me to transact more on their platform, which is not unusual for us to experience at times, right? That's where you lose the trust, right? So it's not so much about how much, it's about how transparently you do these things, right? And let the control still be with the customer. Do not take personalization to an extent where it becomes you automating their decisions. Take the personalization to the extreme of helping people make better decisions, right? And I don't think the ethics will then come into question, right? If that makes sense, Rahul, Kevin.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a brilliant point. I think when I think algorithmically, it's about making the trade-offs, right? It's about making, having the right objective functions in there. And we have seen several examples in our work and in our experience where banks have started telling us about, the objective function being financial well-being, right? It's about the fact that I don't want to sell the highest tier of credit card to them anymore because that's most profitable for me, but I want to make sure they have the right portfolio of products, right? So we are increasingly seeing that trend. And so as you rightly said, right, I think it's about the intent of the personalization. It's about, again, are you drawing them to, because I think algorithmically those lines can be drawn easily. I mean, for us, it's a matter of, weighing one against the other and, putting that into an optimization function, and the algorithm will do its gradual descent into the right answer, no pun intended, but but you know what I mean, right? I mean, it'll do whatever you ask it to kind of optimize. And so I think that point is extremely crucial. Thanks for that, Anurag and Kevin. Kevin, here's something that might be interesting given your experience in the industry. At what point do you see diminishing returns from investments in personalization? I appreciate it's a broad question, but I'm curious to know your perspective on what's the threshold for maximizing personalization ROI.
I think you've got to let's see, if it trying to take in an overwhelming number of data sources. I think you need to understand of what are the problem, what's the answer you're trying to come up with, what the type of product that the customer is trying to solve or search for, but the context of that individual. So how do I tailor what products I want to serve up to the customers, and then how do I want to make the recommendations, and then measuring the ROI associated with those. So as I'm making those are the different data points that are going in, what's the ROI justified with those?
Yeah, I think in our experience, thanks for that, Kevin. I think in our experience, where we've seen is where you've gone from baseline type of high-level segmentation type of personalization down to, at least, kind of going and looking at individual journeys and pattern recognition and doing that kind of work. I think we've seen a tremendous lift in year one, right? Because, you're actually now getting very surgical. So it's actually a paradigm shift in the way you're doing personalization.
Yeah.
I don't think the ideal state that we've been talking about today, and, Anurag bringing in context and things like that have happened. But we've seen, significant ROI, almost 25 to 50x in some cases, $1 billion in top line impact because of the way you just shifted from product-centric personalization, product-driven personalization to just understanding intent, right? And just trying to at least, be, relevant at a first level with, at least not be blanket in the blanket email world. But then, of course, I don't think enterprises have tested personalization to the level Facebook or Google takes it, right? I think they're far away from it, right? So the answers are unknown, but I think from the first cut, we've seen some remarkable numbers. Of course, they will start to taper off unless you start to do the incremental things that we started.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other part is to where you said, I think organizations in a lot of cases are still testing on one or two products or one or two segments of their business and maybe not have expanded it to the enterprise yet. So I still think there's quite a bit of opportunity.
Yeah, and another aspect I kind of forgot to add also, Kevin, is about how you measure ROI, right? That's also important. It's again, kind of ties back into what you're trying to optimize. Look, if you're really relevant, if you're really looking out for the financial well-being of the customer, you're going to start seeing increasing loyalty, right? So you're going to start seeing an increasing share of wallet. That customer is going to now start transferring everything and every financial asset over to you. A share of wallet is not observed very quickly. A share of wallet will take a couple of years to observe. So, when you embark on this, I think when you're talking about ROI, you got to be very clear how you're defining it, what time frames you're measuring it over.
Yes.
Because you could trade off very quick financial and profitability gains, for doing something which is, I think, not probably suboptimal for the customer, and you may lose that larger share of wallet. So you may see tremendous ROI coming through. I think it's quite interlinked to, how you define success as well.
Correct. Absolutely. That taking the long, and I think for us, especially as AWS, we always take the long-term view on things. So there's things you want to be able to test and trial out, but understanding how do I build that loyalty? How do I build that share and potentially add on, even within my businesses or my product portfolio?
Yep. Thanks. Anurag, any points from your side or?
So, I mean, just listening to both of you, right? I was just thinking, right? I mean, if Netflix was truly personalizing for me, right, then why would it give me so many options, right? So, in many ways, right, what we are doing is we have moved from a 2-bucket, 3-bucket segmentation to say 1,000, 10,000 bucket segmentation, right? But the epitome of personalization will be when I have 3 things to choose from to see, right? That means the customer or the provider has truly taken into account all that my preferences are in that moment, right? And produced a list that I can work with, right? If that recommendation list is endless, both laterally and vertically, right? Then what Kevin was saying, that you're still trying, you're still testing, how to kind of get to that level of personalization, right? If you go to a store, right, and you have a salesperson dealing with you, his personalization is limited to 2 or 3 things, right? One, because it's his capacity that he cannot deal with that many, right? But I think he also understands much better that where can I get the customer to convert, what is best for him, right? So I think the route to good personalization is still some distance away, right? If it makes sense.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things too, just time for everyone. Time is precious. So where you can leverage technology to learn from, again, these different signals that are out there to serve up options to where I'm not having, if I've done searches before, but I've got recommendations or other things, where you can short circuit. I think that's tapping into an emotion to where we all are trying to compress and do more things within that time. So leveraging that information to make those recommendations as well.
Yep. Great, thanks. There is a question here which says, in the majority of cases, you have very weak signals for you to make personalization decisions. how do you design your personalization processes when you're going on a hunch about someone's situation? Now, great question. Um, I can take a first shot at this. Increasingly, we are seeing less of this. Actually, we are because in a D2C world today, you're actually picking up not just, you may have weak transactional signals, or there is another problem in personalization where there's very low variability in the signals that you're seeing. Right? You've been sending the same campaigns to the same group of people time and time again, and so on and so forth. That's a great example of how there's very little variation in what you're in the data. What we're seeing is fusing unstructured data is helping out, because while you may have weak transactional signals, you may have information sitting in call center notes, right? You may have information on chat transcripts. You may have information on clickstream, where you may have weak transactional signals, but you may have a lot of interaction signals that have just not been opened up. I mean, it's surprising when we talk to banks today, right, and we start talking about personalization initiatives. We are still in a very siloed world. The reality is that these data sets are not really freed up, right, to the extent that we think. Whenever we start talking about personalization, whenever we embark on programs, we always are talking about, is your data ready? Is it ready to go? Integrity and quality checks, and then we can embark. And we realize the struggles are still there. For example, it's not easy to get clickstream data, or it's not easy to get call transcript data from cases. So that's number one, right? Just fuse more and more data sets. Secondly, I think we have been quite successful in using some of the ideas from the world of unstructured data sets, right? Unstructured data where you take decisions, where you have, things like one-shot learning or few-shot learning, and, you have very little examples, but you've got to make decisions. Transfer learning is another example where, you may have weak signals in a domain, but you could potentially use information, already created intelligence, and, just, kind of transfer learn it to your system. There are other algorithms which are, you could take decisions based on things like the entire paradigm of reinforcement learning, which is basically taking decisions under uncertainty or under weak kind of, signal presence. So there are several ways. I understand that, it's still, if you have really weak signals, then I think, you got to just expand just the breadth of the data. And number two, I think just the algorithmic set that you're probably working with. There could be things out there which you could use to kind of bypass the problem, or at least even cold start the problem or cold start the solution. Kevin, Anurag, anything on that front?
Yeah, I would say to that's especially within the consumer products industry right now, we are seeing this huge push in the D2C. So where they've struggled a lot is to get the information. So how do I personalize decisions knowing about where they go in the store? I'm dependent on the retailer and what data they have. Through the D2C type models now, they can tap in direct and set up direct relationships with those customers, and then link in some of their personalized information and offer them almost tailored or personalized products. But having that one-to-one interactions and data is giving them a much richer set to tap into. So that's what we're seeing, especially within the CPG industry.
Just one comment, right? I mean, there is artificial intelligence in the context of which we look at data signals as weak or thick or whatever else, right? But human intelligence, for instance, is designed to work with weak signals. In fact, our first priority is to deselect, then select, right? We want to take information out because we cannot work with so much information, right? So we're tuned to make heuristic-based decisions, right? We are quick to jump to a decision, right? And it's not that most of the times we're making bad decisions, right? Most of the times we are making good decisions, useful decisions for ourselves, right? So this AI's ambition to be perfect, right, is what kind of drives this idea that weak signals are bad, right? But human intelligence works with it. So I don't see a reason why we cannot pick weak signals and kind of drive decision making. And like Rahul said, if you set up a learning mechanism, then AI will learn with weak signals, how to work with weak signals, right? And, just an obtuse point, right? But human brain is designed to work with weak signals, and the brain project I'm hoping is about getting AI to work like a human brain, right? So maybe there is scope there as well.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Anurag. I think wonderful conversation. I think that's all the time we have for today. So, just putting together a summary of I mean, I've not been taking notes, so please excuse me if I miss out points. But Anurag, thank you for that wonderful provocation. I think it's important to, I mean, we all agree personalization is been around for a while. Technology has now caught up to do all kinds of very cool stuff. You have the Netflix, the Facebooks, and these are the gold standards of personalization. I think what's important, as Anurag pointed out, is human beings make decisions which are driven by emotions, which are driven by biases, and under specific context. So it's very important not just to understand the entity taking the decision, but also the environment and how they interact, right? And under what conditions do people take decisions? That's number one. Number two, it's not just enough to be able to be very precise, to build the most accurate algorithms, and to predict what the customer is likely to do next. You can go down, I think, and we spoke endlessly about what kinds of algorithms we can use to make those decisions. I think it's about how do you orchestrate that decision to make sure it's impactful and it progresses, or you learn from a particular goal progression based on that particular decision, right? So the decision environment is as important as the decision, there are various different ways in which you can orchestrate that. And the third one is about pushing the boundaries. I think we had some very good questions from the panel, from the audience around, how do you decide, and what do you really optimize for when you're doing the personalization, right? As an enterprise, what are the boundaries of ethical personalization? And we spoke about the fact that algorithmically it's easy to manage, but I think it's about really drawing that line up between the trade-off, or understanding the trade-off between the well-being versus profitability, if they are mutually exclusive, or understanding those trade-offs. We spoke about it to a certain extent in the context of the connected car. And Kevin, thank you very much for your insights on how technology can enable where we are. I think the story is, look, personalization, while it's there, I see that given our experience, we are seeing it kind of saturate. I think it's time to potentially take it to the next level. I think we are equipped. We are building that solution as enterprises in different ways. Facebook and Google thrive on it because that's essentially, I mean, behind them, they have massive customer intelligence models. And I don't see enterprises being very far away from that, right? Or we don't see enterprises. I think some of the provocations and some of the concepts that Kevin introduced today, I think these are things which we can we should aim towards, which we should try and bring try and incorporate as possible. So I think that's it. Thank you very much, Anurag. Thank you very much, Kevin. Wonderful conversation. And Garima, over to you to close.
Yes, thank you so much, Kevin, Anurag, and Rahul, for those interesting insights and sharing your perspective with us. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank our attendees for your participation and spending time with us today. We do have a request on your way out. If you could take a moment to share your feedback on the webinar through the quick survey that we have posted in the chat box. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day ahead and hope to see you again on our future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.